Hey everyone, and welcome to Painters Motivating Painters Reviews. This is part two of our monthly review for June. If you've not seen the first part, just click over into the channel. They should all be there. And if you want to subscribe while you're there, feel free. We only do a couple of videos a month, so we don't be spamming you or anything like that. Um, so we had a lot of lovely busts and 75 mil scale models already reviewed in the previous video, and then we're going to do the other half now. We're gonna just start off with Joe Swenson. So I'll let Jim pick his up from there.
Alrighty, yeah, Joe's saying that this is his first bust, so nice one for cracking into them. And the first foray into oil paints, and couldn't be happier. So, yeah, good stuff, man. That's good to see. Struggling with TMM like the last one. And he's tried to wet blend lighter and darker metallics, which is working well on the rusty steel, but not much on the gold. And then he says the leather and skin is oil paint. He's happy with it, just wants to push the contrast even more since he was going for Rembrandt. So with Rembrandt, if I'm right, I mean I'm not hugely up on my artist. I'm not going to lie, but I think he's the guy that has like really obvious lighting, like in the center of the piece. Is that right? So it's kind of
Yeah, so he's Rembrandt shadow guy, so the really big occlusion shadows across faces and
yeah,
things.
that's it. Yeah, so it's almost like a vignette, if you like. So it makes a very direct lighting situation where the attention wants to be. So if we click into the photos, um, it would be a really good model actually to do this on. There's a nice picture. You could have the face nice and bright, and like the edge of the cowl and like the upper chest area would be really bright, and then darken everything else down. That'd be a really nice way to kind of capture that Rembrandt setting. So if that's what you were going for, exaggerate it a bit more, because it's this definitely. I mean, it's the brightest piece. It's the eye catching because it's where the green is. But as for the browns, it's kind of uniformly lit across the whole thing. Um, for the leather, I'd say I think that's sculpted detail on the belt strap thing that's over his shoulder. So you could exaggerate some of that weathering wise just to sell the leather. Leather always sells better if it's weathered, I find. It's just easier to resolve it that way. So same with the cowl. It's very smooth. I've got this picture on the back. There's not much sort of scratching or hashing or anything to it. Also, the details and the shadows are kind of blowing out a bit because it's a bit glossy. So you're losing a bit of contrast in the photos. I don't know how it looks really in your hand, but it won't look like this. So yeah, matting this down. But it does look like you could deepen some of these shadows and add some more highlights to the ridges and stuff. And you could put like textured stippling and stuff like that in there just to give it a bit more interest. For the metals, I thought the golds, as you say, it's kind of a little bit of a one-trick pony. So just keep watching videos, just keep practicing it. I know you said you struggled with it before, but separating elements, really pushing shadows. So like browns, really browns, reds, and stuff were good shadows for gold. And then coming up to like really bright tones. I think this is quite reflective metallic paint anyway, so it's kind of doing the job for you. But I really like what you did with the skin. I think that looks really good. How you brought these flesh tones into like the nose and the lips. That looks awesome. Do think you've got an opportunity for it in the ears. So yeah, putting some flesh tones in there look really nice. I like the way you varied the eyes as well. That's cool. And the little glint reflection is really nicely done. So good job there. The only other thing I thought was you could maybe add a little bit more detail to the two teeth that are sticking out. They do look a little bit like just base coated and not much else after that. It could be the photos, I'm not sure. Looks like there's a bit more on this one, but yeah, a little bit more separation, bit of striation, plaque, that sort of stuff. Bit of variation there, but on the whole, yeah, great job for a first bust, man. You've done really well with a lot of things, so yeah, just keep pushing, keep practicing, and yeah, look forward to seeing the next one, man. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think like I said, trying out a lot of new stuff. I think a lot of things work really well. I love the red in the nose and the lips and everything like that, and the eyes as well. The metallics, I think the steel looks pretty good. The gold, it just doesn't have. It looks pretty good in a couple of angles, but in other places it doesn't have kind of. It's the shadows that are missing. So I'd recommend instead of trying to mix like a darker gold with a lighter gold, use a non-metallic paint for your shadows. So if you use like a dark brown or even like a hint of black, because that's gonna also it's gonna dull it out, and so you will have a not reflective surface there, which kind of reads as being darker as well. And then on since you got, I know Jim mentioned the leathers, but it might be an idea if you're working on something like this because he doesn't have too many materials, but like the leather of his belt and the leather of his hood look quite similar, especially in the rear view. So you could think about how you could, like differentiate them. Like they could be different kind of colors of leather. One of them could be much darker or lighter, and they could also, I'd say, the belt might be more worn or whatever way you want to do it. But just especially in areas where you have, a leather strap going across his leather shoulder, you want to make sure that the eye immediately picks up that they're different. I think in the front of you it looks pretty good because you got nice scratching and stuff on the belt, but yeah, it's just a minor point to be honest with you. It's a great looking bust.
Yeah, just sort of adding on to there about sort of the separation between the levers as well is that I think you could take a slightly darker recess shade along that belt as well, just to make it stand as really, really distinct. Because on one of the first photo there, it'll be to do with it's slightly the focus is on the camera focuses on the face, so it's a little bit blurry around there, but it looks almost so it's just one continuous piece of sort of fabric there. So breaking that up would make it a little bit sort of clearer. And where you mentioned contrast and wanting to sort of up that a little bit more in what you said as well. Just in general, that's an oil paint thing. Because of the way that everything blends out in oil paints, where you sort of put your color on and then blend it out, the contrast always comes down, and you always need to go back and do a second or third pass to really amp that up. You can get those lovely smooth blends, but it's just going to sort of mix all those paints together, and you're going to lose that contrast. So just going in with either starting over contrasted to the point that it looks almost jarringly weird, and then blending that down, or doing another pass once you've got those nice blends and it's really nice tones here and nice sort of attention to the volumes, but then just going back and doing a second pass, put a bit more of your light color in, a bit more of a slightly over contrasted color in, and blend that back down again will sort of help that level out as well. It's for a first time using oils, you've got a lot better sort of levels of the contrast than a lot of some people do when they jump to that from acrylics. But it's just sort of adapting to a new medium, so to speak. But it's a really nice piece.
All right, cool. Cheers, Joe. So,
Um,
Alex, up next. You got June BG.
Yeah. So just looking at the McFarlane Sister of Battle, I just does anyone know what scale that roughly comes out to? I think they're about 112, but
Massive.
um,
Big.
Very big.
yeah, I think they're roughly equivalent to like a 112 bust, but taken for a full body, which is pretty big. So there's a lot that you can sort of do there with that in terms of like you've got things like the contrast there. I like sort of a lot of the tones that you've got going. I think the sort of general scale is interesting. There's a lot going on there, and you've kept it quite well sort of balanced out. It's not too sort of busy at all. You keep that focus on the face there with that, particularly with that bright white, which I think is done really well. A lot of people struggle with whites, but I think that looks really nice. Um, and just sort of in general though, I think you've got a few places where things look a little bit not as clean and tidy as they could be painted. You can see on the sort of the photo where you've got the shoulder pad towards the front, that there's a bit of overspill of the metallic paints in places. It's just tidying that up a little bit, either going a little bit slow with a really sharp tip brush to get those sort of areas without any overpaint to begin with, or just going back in and tidying it up with the other color, the black there afterwards. That just comes down to sort of brush control and things, which is something that comes with time. There's not really any way to practice or get better at brush control besides just painting. So there's nothing particularly wrong with that in terms of getting that right. I think that the sort of the reds you've got, it's a really interesting, really deep, rich red. I really, really like the color tone there. It could have a little bit more contrast in it though, particularly sort of looking at the back. Obviously, the back is less important, but like on the sort of the reds on the back, it's more or less one highlight, one shade. So we could take that a little bit further and just bring that little bit more interest there. You sort of painted it with a general top-down zenithal white, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a very sort of easily readable and easily paintable sort of lighting scheme. But if we're going with it looking like that from the front, it can help to carry that through to the back as well. But no, in general, I quite like what you've got going here. I like the sort of the overall sort of color palette and things. It reads quite cleanly. Just the biggest thing for me is just sort of tidying up on some of those sort of overspill areas and maybe a bit more recess shading to separate some of the fields there.
Yeah, I quite like this piece. I would say the red on the loincloth thing was the best. So as Alex said, the sleeves look a little bit shiny though. So if you could like maybe matte those out, that'll probably help photos quite a lot. The only major thing I would say like is for the black armor, it is very black, just like with edge highlights and damage. So if you want to take black armor to the next level, try reserving the black for like the deepest shadow and actually use a mixture of like greys or other interference colors depending on their environment that they're in. It does actually reflect other colors quite well. So 50% of the armor should be dark, like from the mid-tone down to shadows, and then you can use other colors to make it a little bit more interesting. But yeah, other than that, these things must be quite tricky to paint because they're so big. So yeah, good job, June. Matt?
Yeah. I really like it. I think the color scheme really works. It's got a very like churchy feel, which, I guess is meant to be a theme with these Sisters of Battle. And the helmet, as Alex said, like it really stands out. Like, and you definitely did the right thing, focusing a lot of attention there because it draws a lot of attention and it's the most important bit. And it looks like super clean and really nice looking. One of the things about when you have surfaces like especially the way you have like embossed metal and you've got a black panel and you've got an embossed bit kind of sticking out of it, it's very annoying to have the silver just stop and then the black immediately start, and it can be very fiddly and you have to go back and just deal with it afterwards. So one thing that I tend to do is when you're painting it in, maybe don't be too worried about it initially because you're going to have to come back and tidy up all the edges later. So then if you get a bit of silver overspill, it's actually easier to tidy that up with the black later on rather than trying to go right up to the edge and then stop, just clear of it. That's just something that might be helpful to yourself. I think the gold looks really well as well, and I love all the little fleur-de-lis all over the piece. So it's very nice, and definitely, these are often just great plastic on people's shops. So good job. Okay, I'm going to move on up. Then we have another lady. So this is a 75mm bust. Big learning experience. Changed the color on the tunic like 5 times. Yep, totally understand that. Any feedback on where to bust the contrast further and deal with the face and the hair. Okay, so on the color scheme, like it's kind of tricky to talk about color schemes because there's no right answer. Like you can paint stuff whatever way you want, really. So we had in the previous video, the first video or review of the month, there was another kind of ranger lady, and she was all in green and brown and gold, and that looked very nice. It was kind of staying in a warm, kind of earthy palette. Here you've got cold colors entering as well in the blue and the kind of purpley brown of the bodice. But like there's they're both perfectly fine. You're a little bit probably one of the things that maybe threw you a bit is the red hair because it is quite actually red like this phone as opposed to red like my hair. You've got red and green, which are complementary colors, so that's already filling up a lot of space in your palette. So then you were looking at the other elements going, oh, can this tie in here? Can it tie in there? And I think you definitely like blue is totally a viable option, and you kept it fairly desaturated, which is a good look for it. And having the different kind of brands, as we said earlier on the leathers, to make them look different is definitely a good call. And it's tying in a little bit with there, so can't complain at all. Then, well, let me just scroll down. Everything's obviously picked out really cleanly. There's lots of really, really small, like even though it's a 75mm lady, like little tiny daggers and straps and everything's picked out pretty much spot on. So great work for doing that. Putting in like we can see a little bit of color in the eyes, which is great, and then the eyebrows actually being painted as well. It's good. The texture, you can appreciate the texture work that you put in. On the wool, I think the kind of stippling, dabby texture on the back looks a bit better on the wool on her tunic. Um, you have a lot of kind of like lines in other places, but for me, the kind of like more stippled look looks better for kind of like a cotton or a wool fabric, just because it doesn't seem so much like, a threaded kind of material, like another material might be. So on the rear view, I think that looks really well, kind of under her arm there. Um, and then the bodice part, like the kind of purpley leather, it looks good and it's differentiated from the other leathers. It doesn't have as much wear as any of the other ones. So it looks like it's brand new, as opposed to the other things looks like she's been wearing them for a while. So I don't know if that could be part of the story. Check out my new outfit, but just so you know, that's kind of how we read it. If we see something that has no wear on it compared to other things, it actually looks newer to us. The only thing that kind of seemed like it needed a bit more attention to me was the sword, because the sword is actually quite a big element of what's going on in this story. Because she's like leaping forwards, in this very dynamic pose. She's got this flying cape, but then she's leaping forwards with a sword, like she's attacking someone. So I think we could have a lot more attention drawn up to there to kind of show the situation. Because arguably, it's like one of the most important elements is the sword, but it's kind of just been could definitely have a bit more highlight on it, and more kind of attention paid to it as part of the overall piece. I think the kind of stippling work that you did on the legs looks really good. Uh, is a lot more interesting than just having kind of a plain green color there. And then the boots also, I like how, as I said, you have lots of different kind of leathers going on, and they all read separately and like they're actually made of different bits of leather instead of just being made out of the one. Like they were all made as part of an outfit. So good work on all of those points. Alex?
Yeah. Just looking at what you were asking about the sort of text in general, and making them sort of show up and read a bit sort of more on show and cleaner. Something that I like to do with when I'm sort of texturing things to make sure that it comes across quite visibly is remember even at a larger scale like 75 mil, textures still, strictly speaking, wouldn't show at that scale. It's so small that if you think of the threads in your shirt, that's so tiny that from a little bit of distance, the person you're standing next to can't see them. So a tiny model like that, you can't see it. It's an artistic interpretation. So overdo it. Just go all the way. Really make it crazy, crazy visible. Then if you think it's too much, you can always just glaze back down and hide it and sort of fuzzy it over. I think that's a really nice way to. Yes, you can always add more, but it's not one of those cases where you can add more, you can't take away. You can easily take away in this case, and sometimes that can make it look better. Because if you over texture it, then push it down, fade it down, and then you can fade it even further in the shadows because texture doesn't really show in shadows as much as highlights. So you can help really control that contrast of texture as well as the sort of actual, the value contrast as well, and that really helps with making that read quite well. I think you're right that you could possibly, push the texture a little bit more if you're wanting it to read that way. What you've got is really nice, but it's very, very subtle. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it's a personal taste thing. In my painting and in my personal taste of what I like to look at, I like things that have got lots of texture showing. So I think it's a really nice way to give a good impression of the world. So that's one way to do that. And then I think you also asked about the skin and hair, or the face and hair. I think the face is fine. I think the face looks really, really nice. The volumes are, it's quite a subtle sort of highlight on the volumes, but that fits in with the style you've gone for the rest of it. So it doesn't look out of place at all. I think it looks really nice, and I think the detail in the eyes is really nice as well. I struggle with 75 mil eyes a lot of the time because our 32 mil models are heroic scale and they've got those exaggerated proportions. A 75 mil model can sometimes have smaller eyes than your little 32 mil model and be a lot harder. But then because everything else is bigger, you're expected to do more detail. So I think what you've got there is really, really nice. And I think the hair could use a little bit more contrast just to give it that nice shine. Something that I think is a really good reference image for hair is actually ribbons. The way that ribbons reflect light is pretty much exactly the same as the way that hair reflects light. So when you're painting it, if you think of it as undulating ribbons in little clumps for the little hair clumps, that can make that render a lot easier and a lot nicer to sort of get that nice contrast and those high reflection points. But in general, I think it's really nice. I think it's just what Matt was saying about it being a little bit too much of a red than a sort of red hair red. But besides that, no, I think overall it's a really nice piece, something you should be really happy with. Jim?
Pretty much covered all my points, lads. Very comprehensive. I thought I really like the red as it is. Personally, could maybe bump up the halo highlight just ever so slightly. Everything else has been covered except I thought maybe the tree you could do a little bit of integration there. You could put some mosses on there, some greens in there. It looks like a pretty aged, gnarly thing, so you would expect a little bit of green stuff growing on it. It'd also tie it together with the theme of the actual model as well. But yeah, really nice, man. Moving up, we're going to Jim Pope, another first bust. It was nice working on a larger scale. It is, isn't it? It's rewarding. Not one particular thing I was trying out, as it was just a complete experiment into painting larger scale, so any CNC is appreciated. So when painting a larger scale, you've got to go further with things like, as Alex was saying, textures and pulling out extra little details, painting them in if they're not there to make them a little bit more interesting, because you've got larger areas that aren't as interesting as they could be. So like what you've done with the this pattern along the cheekbones, so that's a nice touch there, and the way you've done the eyebrows as well. So this thing in general, I think you've got stuff on there nice and smooth, and that's cool, but I do think you need to push your contrasts around on this. So firstly, the light values of it. So if we spin around to her arm's a really good example of it over here. So like the underneath of her arm is pretty much exactly the same color as what's on top. In fact, what's on top is maybe a little bit darker because you've used different hues, tones and stuff. This is a little bit more sort of reddy, purpley, ruddy than the skin that's on her face. So yeah, having obvious darker underneath wherever the light's coming from, it's going to affect shadows. So the photos looks like it's got a flash on it or a very harsh light, so some of this feedback might be a bit warped for that reason. In future, don't have such a bright light on your Mini. If you can see a shadow like this, it's too bright. So diffuse the light with a piece of paper or a muslin cloth or something like that. Just note for next time. Yeah, you've done a little bit of the shading underneath on the blue, but you just need to take it a lot further. Same goes for the fur, really. I mean, this doesn't look like amazingly well sculpted fur, and no fur is particularly great, but it just looks a little bit soft and difficult to pick out those details. I do like what you did with the eyes, putting the eye makeup in there to sort of bring it into the same colour palette as the clothes that she's wearing and the earrings. So good work there. Nice little tattoo as well. This could be sharper, but obviously you didn't say you were going for like competition or display or anything. It's just a trial into it. So yeah, in the face you're going to need more tones. You're going to need more bluiness up in here, like purpley blue into the eyes, more red around the nose and the cheeks, like a rosy red, not like a maroon red. In the ear as well, around the neck and collarbone, you can definitely push some more shadow colours around in there. And then the other thing I noticed really, two things actually. One, the hair. So the hair looks like it could definitely be exploited. It's quite nicely sculpted, so you could definitely show off the sheen of the hair. So 50% of the hair wants to be black. The rest of it wants to be sort of transitioning up from greys into white, very, very bright white where the highlight is. Because it's quite a soft sheen, you need to make those highlights quite broad. Loads of videos on it, check them out. But yeah, definitely a chance for that. And then the other thing that's really probably the thing that I've most noticed is needing attention is the way you painted the ruby, the gem things. So right idea, kind of upside down. I think these would look a lot better if it was dark at the top, very, very dark, like darker than what you've got here. And then do the transition the other way. So the brightness is at the bottom and then the glint reflection is at the top. And you could even do a very, very tiny one at the bottom, like super, super bright white. So that white, there'd be a little line of it across here, but then it would be like a daub like you've done there at the top. So basically flip the whole thing round and that will look an awful lot better. Again, loads and loads of videos. Oh, that's a better picture. Yeah, loads and loads of videos on how to do this. Executed quite well. Just flip it up the other way and that will look an awful lot better. So there you go, Jim. I hope that helps. Anyone else?
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing about the gem, just as something to work on for yourself. Like they're really fun to paint when you get into it. You could even do them like on a sheet of paper, like flat, because what you're trying to do is make it look 3D. Basically, the way you have it painted, where it has the highlight on the top, makes it look like it's solid, like it's not translucent. Does that make sense? So it's like some kind of solid blue gem. But then when you do the darkness on the top, then that makes us think the light is passing through, and then when the blue color shows through in the bottom, because that's where it's kind of bounced out and towards your eye. So they're both valid options, and you could do it. Once you start getting into it, you can throw it in other places like her earrings if you wanted to, or a little bracelety thing as well. Uh, my favorite thing about this piece, I think, is it's a very easy to look at in terms of it's lots of nice neutral colors, and I love the kind of bluish, blackish gray you've used in all the clothes, and then that ties in with the blue in the makeup and gives it a very nautical kind of theme without being too overt about it. And obviously, she's meant to be a pirate, and she's got a sea otter and everything. So I think that worked really, really successfully. So great work on your first bust, totally.
Yeah, I'd sort of say very similar things. I think my main thing is that I noticed straight away that made me think this is really nice is the color palette. Again, on what Matt was saying, I think it's really, really sort of well balanced. It's in a very, very nice sort of harmony, which works really, really well. Um, I think again what Jim said about the eye makeup, it's a really, really good way to sort of keep that balanced and just sort of bring that attention in and sort of really focus on the face where it is lacking that little bit of contrast. That helps snap it in and helps sort of make up for that in terms of the focus, which is really, really nice. Something that I noticed about sort of around the piece is there's a few areas on the skin where you're building up some paint texture. So whether that's sort of on the shoulders, you can see that, and on one of her hands, you can see that as well. So whether that's sort of working paint that's sort of half dried and sort of ripping those paint layers, or sort of going on with too thick a layer, it looks more like it's the first one, sort of just the type of texture that's showing up. It looks like you're sort of trying to manipulate the paint a little bit too far while it's drying. It's just taking a little bit of time there's nothing wrong with sort of using a hairdryer to make sure paint flares are fully dry before you go onto them. I do that all the time. But just sort of taking that a little bit more time. It's not as bad on scales where you can kind of vaguely slightly get away with it compared to a small scale, but still something important to focus on. And the plinth, I like it a lot. I would say personally that it's a little bit too tall though. I think there's a sweet spot in the size of a plinth to match with a model. Like personally, I take this one down just a little bit, but it doesn't look unbalanced or anything. It's a nice sort of way of tying with that sort of same sort of slightly more rustic style with the sort of the character that I think works really well. And then Nick Allen moving on to next. Yeah, this is a really nice piece. Planning to enter competition, so as always, we're going to be a bit more nitpicky. But I think you open yourself up to that, especially when you paint a piece this nice. Just starting onto that, I think the first thing that really stands out to me is the metallics, the non-metallic on the headdress thing. I can't quite place what it is exactly, but there's something that just feels not quite there to me for the metallics. I think the contrast doesn't need to be that much higher. You've got these tones all across the piece. It's got that really nice sort of brushed sort of metal look. But I think just sort of taking some of the shadows a bit deeper, and it doesn't feel like anywhere really you've got big areas of pure white. Again, that could be a photo thing. You've kept the value really, really high on the face, which really helps to bring the focus in there. But something that I wouldn't call it a rule. I think there's no strict rules in painting, but a good guideline is save your high even when you've got a face, save your highest value for the non-metallics because it's such a reflective surface. It's no matter what you're painting, the metallics are always going to be brightest thing. So if you've got big areas of non-metallic like this, they need that brightness there. So any other tricks you can pull out the bag to keep the focus on the face while still having it not be as high a value are good. I think you don't need it, just in terms of you got these striking red lips and red eyes, that sort of cold warm contrast between the cooler skin tone and the value contrast there as well, with that sort of really dark sort of linings around the red elements, but more than enough sort of interest in the face. So you can push that contrast a little bit more in the metallics. But I really like the textures there. I think it works really well. And for me, I think the red fabric around I don't know, scarfy thing. I'm not I'm not sure what to call it. Is probably the weakest area to me. Just because the way you've highlighted it doesn't quite feel like it's fully paying attention to those volumes. So folded fabric like this, I think a lot of people get wrong, because a lot of people think of highlighting towards the edge of the folds, but it's very, very similar to muscles in that you want to highlight just all the way, always to the top of where you've got that sort of light source coming from. So if you, it looks like you've got your primary light sources coming down, sort of from the camera right top. So it's not a direct down; it's a little bit over. You've got that slight Rembrandt sort of cast shadow on the camera left cheek, which has got that lovely sort of OSL effect. So having with that, these big dark sort of almost black sort of shadows that you've got on the sort of bit of fabric that's coming across her chest, those parts would be in light. They should be getting some highlight. They shouldn't be that dark. So that just stands out to me as feeling a little bit sort of off kilter there, for how everywhere else is, so well rendered with the volumes. And then the OSL, I think that's the elephant in the room here of what to me stands out as the most well executed part of it. I think it reads so clearly as a glow effect, and you've got a really nice clear sort of direction for it. I think the thing that really helps sell it the most is that occlusion shadow just across the cheek. It makes it really obvious that that's your light direction, that's where it's going, and the way you've interacted it with the sort of grey metal at the top there, it reads so clearly as a really bright sort of almost neon type light, and I think it's really well rendered. I think you could probably fade it out a little bit better around sort of where it sort of goes to the edges. Light obeys sort of that inverse square rule, so it's going to fade out probably a little bit more quickly, and a little bit more softly than you've got it going. It's a little bit sort of a sark end. And I think the way it's interacting with the red fabric, blue and red, in terms of light, they shouldn't. Color theory is a bit of a weird one. You mix pigments, blue and red, you'll get purple. You mix light, it goes to almost more of a more chromatic black. So if it's a bright enough light, you'll get this blue here, but it would still be a lot more desaturated than you've probably got it showing on the red. But that can be argued to be artistic interpretation, so that's fine. I think it's a really, really nice piece, and something you should be very, very happy with. Jim?
Yeah, as mentioned, the red cloth for me was definitely the weakest point, so same point there. You mentioned about looking masculine for some reason. I think it's the nose, personally. The shape, it's very thick and it's very straight, like male noses. Female noses are a little more sort of fluted and they're a lot more delicate, so that's probably mostly down to the sculpt rather than the way you've painted it. But if there is a way to maybe force it with paint, that might help. Also lip shape as well. It's kind of hard to tell because Facebook quality photos, when you're trying to be this nitpicky, aren't very helpful. But it looks like he followed the sculpture of the lips, so it's going to be very difficult. The only other thing I noticed is This is all super nice and super shiny and brushed effect. Why isn't this bit here? There's like this area on like the forehead up to the left. It's kind of the metal's no longer shiny anymore, and there's a very abrupt point where it stops. And same with this highlight here. It's not blended out the same. I don't know if it's just not finished yet or whatever, but this is, it looks unfinished to me. You've gone this far, and then I can't get why this bit wouldn't be like this highlight should be continuing right the way down, because you've got these very linear, stripes coming straight down where you want the attention to that, red spot or the triangle or the diamond in red in the face. All the attention's being drawn here, but this is just, it's screaming out to me. It looks unfinished. I don't know if this is deliberate or whether it really is just not quite finished. But yeah, I think that polished brushed steel effect should definitely be carried through. If it was a conscious decision to leave it out, it's striking me as unfinished. But yeah, the rest of it is outstanding. The OSL glow, I think saturation's about right for it. To be honest, I think if it's this bright though, it would have a darker occlusion shadow across here. So it's right that there is a dark shadow here, but I would deepen that, as Alex says. It's not really dark shadow anywhere on the metal. So if there's going to be anywhere for it, it's going to be here to split the blue from the silver. But yeah, other than that, Nick, awesome stuff. Very nice. Matt.
Yeah. Yeah, so OSL and NMM obviously stunning. Like, the first thing you think when you see this thing is, wow, it's amazing. I think the broken kind of lines of highlight, they're like one of my favorite things because it makes it look like there's actually like they're light fixtures or something that are reflected in it in a kind of mirror-like way. What I would do though is where you have like a highlight coming along and then stop, I'd continue it on the edge highlights of those weird little plate things. I think that's one of the reasons why it looks a bit weird. Like over her top right eye, like there should be more light catches on the edges of all those little chunks of metal because some part of them will reflect whatever light source it is that's being reflected in the main body of the headdress. On the how the blue would reflect off the gold, that's a very tricky question. What you could do is, try it out, get a blue light, shine it on a gold ring. You end up with something that is kind of a weird, like as if you mix kind of ochre with blue, where it's like this grayed out thing. You could try it with just some glazes over the top of it. Um, but at the end of the day, you're gonna have to do some sort of artistic interpretation of it because the way a blue light reflects off a yellow metal is hard to replicate in paint because when you mix them together, they don't obey those same physical properties as Alex was saying. Um, on the face, I think it's quite nice. I think one of the reasons it looks so masculine might be you have very hard shadows in a couple of places, and I'm not sure that they need to be so hard. Like her philtrum, that's that bit of your lip right here, has this like super black line there, where her nose has a much softer shadow on the opposite side of it. So I think if you soften those, that'd make it look a little bit less masculine because we think of men as having more kind of angular faces that would cast deeper, more defined shadows like that. And then around the lips, you've kind of got this shadow going on that's exaggerated. The sculpt being a little bit like not. I'd recommend looking at the cover of the Rocky Art Picture Show and then just trying to emulate those lips as best you can because if you can get the contour of it, that'll make her look a lot more like, when people do lipstick, they paint fake lip parts of their lips on to give them a more kind of curvy, effeminate look to their maze. Assuming that's what they're going for. And then any other notes? Just great work. Like, keep it up. Love to see it. If this is it, still not entirely finished, love to see what the real thing is going to be. And good luck in whatever contest you might enter it in. Nick. Okay, and then we have Steve Smith, another lovely bust, this tank girl. I nearly could have picked out this was a Steve Smith piece just from that jeweled lens. Like, oh, I know that. That's what those night dudes look like, but normally it's blue. Or green or whatever. Okay, so yeah, this is a really great looking piece. The expression is great. The way you've pulled that out, having that kind of light bounce light up in her eyes is really cool as well. I like how you've got a little bit of, there's fairly realistic elements in terms of her cap and stuff, but then the color palette leans more towards fantastical, which is a nice kind of take on the piece. Um, And I really appreciate the way you did the freckles because you seldom see freckles on a model and you seldom see them done correctly, but you've got it exactly right. That kind of orangey brown tone, and they're irregular in shape and size and darkness. So that's looks super great. Couple of little notes that you can improve yourself. She has a few little tiny balls of paint. We've said that a few pieces, but you've got them on her cheek just here and here, and then a little few bits in the hair. It just happens if you're working on a piece for a long time, bits start to dry out. So pick them off, get your razor and your magnifiers, or you could even just paint them to look like moles or whatever, just to be aware of. They're one of those things where it's like, I mean, how much does it actually detract from the model? But once you see them, you can never ever unsee them. So I'm sorry I pointed them out. Um, the eyebrows, the way you've done the hairs in, it's a nice touch. I like the way that it matches her hair color as well. But if you look carefully, that's not the direction that your hairs and your eyebrows grow. So right close to the bridge of your nose, they grow vertically, but the rest of it, they follow along the uh, the actual line of the eyebrow. Um, and then in her eyes, especially the left one, they look a little bit dry. So there's no like they're really nicely painted and everything, but there's no water line down here. So in an eye, you get like this little tiny pool of water in behind the eyelid, and that creates another actual reflective bounce light, which I'm sure you'd be able to pick out on this, and it'd be a nice touch. So what I'd actually really recommend for yourself, fun activity, take a photo of your own eye, blow it up really big, and take out a pencil and a piece of paper and just try and draw it as exactly as you possibly can. Don't worry about color or shade or anything, but just draw on every single line that you can see in an eye, and you'll find there is loads of stuff going on with eyes. So, uh, and the more you practice it, people who do 2D art spend ages and ages trying to get the eyes to look right, and there's a lot to be learned from that if you want to look at a tutorial for it as well. Um, and then the only other thing is that I'd kind of expect to see maybe a bit more of a reflection in a couple of places on her face, like on like the bulb of the nose, and maybe like a little bit along the cheekbones, just where your skin is a little bit glossier. It looks a little like she's wearing kind of powder to stop her because stop the sheen there. So I don't know if that's what you're going for. But just those areas tend to like the way on her collarbone she's got that kind of sheen there. Um, so you might want to add that in. I think the metallics are looking fairly good. The non-metallics, they're fairly understated. I think the weathering looks really good on her ear thingy-majiggers. Gem looks phenomenal as usual. I think adding in the tattoo on her back was a great touch where it's just filling a little space, it's a little nice detail, and it's really well done as well. And it's in character with the kind of how we imagine her, whoever this tank girl is. Great job. Max?
Yeah, so as always, there's a lot of nitpicking to be had and a lot of not too much in the way of sort of obvious flaws. It's a really, really nice piece. I mean, for a first bust, I mean, this looks like really amateur work. I've got to say, there's no, honestly, it's fantastic. I mean, to say first bust, we've seen your work before. We know that you paint really well. So turning your attention towards busts, very exciting to see. Um, Sort of something that I really, really like. That really to me stands out as very, very nice. Is the way you've used sort of the lighting. It isn't sort of a full hard Rembrandt light, but it does have that sort of camera left sort of bias to it. You've got a brighter sort of one side on the face than the other. It has a really nice sort of directionality to it. As English language speaking people, we read sort of left to right in general. So that sort of camera left light really helps to direct the eye, and it's a really really nice sort of effect you've got there where it's super subtle. I mean, you see that sometimes where it's insanely sort of overly harsh. I mean, sometimes that's intentional. I paint with quite harsh shadows because I like to do lighting effects. Doing it this way where it's just that nice subtle way of leaning that sort of directionality into it. It's really really nice. It gives a really sort of pleasing look to the eye. I think that on the face though, you've clearly gone with that sort of artistic idea of color zones of the face of blue, red, yellow. I think the yellow on the forehead is really nice, and the red around the cheeks, that rouging there, is really really good as well. I think you've just gone a little bit too obvious with the blue. It looks almost in places like a little bit of a sort of 12 o'clock shadow on her face in places, which maybe not the look you're going for. So um, just toning that back a little bit, keeping it sort of in those blue tones more in the shadows than sort of across the whole area of the lower third of the face. But again, that's a little nitpicky thing. I think, like Matt said, the freckles are really, really nice. I'm painting something at the moment with liver spots. I use this piece as a reference because they're very, very nice, very sort of subtle. I've seen a lot of people where they've put freckles on and it's so extreme, and it just doesn't look right. But this is really, really nice. Um, for me, the hair feels it's an odd one because it's really nicely painted and you've got this clear sort of color gradient going through. But I think it could have that little bit more reflectivity. Again, it comes back to that idea of sort of what I was saying before about ribbons and hair having that sort of look to it. Um, but then again, it fits with the style of the rest of the piece. That sort of really shiny look. It is realistic. It is how hair behaves. But then exaggerating that moves away from the more realistic style you've got with the skin. So it's about finding that balance of I think the hair could do with just a little bit more contrast, not that much more. It's very very close, and I think the choice of using that sort of fading out on the hair color towards the end really helps with the composition as well, because that hair moving across is like an eyeline vector trying to pull your attention away, but by fading it out, you create that vignette look that just pulls everything straight back in. It just snaps all the focus straight back on the face. And it's just a really really nice sort of effect there. And similar to what Matt said on the tattoo, I think it's one of the nicest tattoos I've seen sort of painted on a model, where you've got that really sort of faded, old, healed over tattoo look. Tattoos have 2 3 layers of skin grown over the top of them. So when people do, when you don't want it to be even a black tattoo doesn't look black once it's healed over, unless it's very very fresh. So you've got that down to a T. It's really really nice and really cleanly painted as well. I think it's just a very excellent piece overall. Um, but yeah, no, Jim.
Yeah, pretty much all covered. I agree. Mostly, I think the hair is where the biggest improvement could be made. There is some like extreme highlighting that's happened, like over her right shoulder, but it seems to be like more into the like magenta and purple hair, where that like sheen highlight is really missing. Is where it's obvious. Like it's more it's more shiny on the sort of orangey yellow hair than it is on the magenta stuff. But yeah, the rest of it beautiful. Love the textures, how you differentiate the materials. The lens is brilliant, brilliant lens, and just glorious. The whole face, totally glorious. I think this the 5 o'clock shadow that so you mentioned about that, Alex. Um,
Yeah.
Yes, a little bit. Yeah, I hadn't noticed it until he said it, but yeah, I think I could agree with that as well. But it was a good idea to kind of infuse the tones that you've used in the cap to make the shadows a bit more interesting. Maybe even reflecting the color of it. I don't know. But yeah, pretty stunning work, man. Well done again. Look forward to the next one. Okay, moving up, we've got William Tan painted this for a Discord challenge, second ever bust. Inspired by La Muerta, so Book of Life. So it looks like a kind of like a festival goer for Dias dos Muertos, or whatever it is, the Festival of the Dead. Very, very cool theme. Looking good. So what to improve? Do you need to focus on lights? It's a freehand clean. Just been painting for a year. Nice, nice, well done. And how far I've come and how far I can grow. So cool, let's have a look. Yeah, I really like what you've done with the face, with the free hands there, that patterning. I'm pretty sure that's freehand. So really, really nice there. You could maybe shade the white of the cheeks just a little bit more, like under the hat, maybe a little bit. But yeah, what you've done with the eyes and the whole patterning of the whole thing is very, very crisp and clean. So well done with that. The hair's done very nicely. You could just boost those sheen highlights a little bit more. just push those up. But the shadows on it look really good, and like the overall tone of it, it's selling as black, but it's clearly not just flat black. So you've done a really nice job with the black. Fingies, I'd probably deepen the shadows in between the fingies and put some more reds in around the knuckles, bit more variation there. And then the scales to me look like they could be, like the edges could be picked out a little bit more. Let's have a look at the back. So volumetrically, it's looking quite nicely shaded, but it's kind of 1-2. So you got two tones where you could push this a lot further. You could push the highlights a lot higher. So you've got two tones here, maybe three at a push. But if you went for 5, so 1 being the brightest highlight, 5 being the deepest shadow under here. So at the moment you've got sort of 5 here and then like a 3 here and a 2 here. So yeah, pushing those up. Same for the red. You go in the right direction, but just push the highlights. I think you'd be in a really strong place there. Maybe add texture if you wanted to. And then you could just put a few more shades into this hat that's up on the top. So the way that's sort of lifted up, that would cast a bit of a shadow in this sort of area. So pushing a few darker tones around in there would really help. But on the whole, I think this is a really fun piece, man. It's really cool. Oh, let me zoom out and see the base, because I loved what you did with the base as well. That was cool, bringing those colours in. So you got the bright yellows here, bright yellows in the hair. So you've got this like nice line going down the whole piece, incorporating a nice bone colour as well. They look quite realistic bone. It's quite easy to overdo them and make them look a little bit sort of bleachy blanchy, but I think those are really nice bone tones that you've got going on there. So well done, William. Anybody else got something to say?
Yeah, I think like it's really great work for painting a year. It's extremely precisely painted, like the way you've got everything in every. And I know this like it's a small enough space, even if it is a bust, to paint on like the face and the little patterns and everything. And it's done with like even zooming in on the computer, extremely high level of precision. So great work for all that. For your next step, I agree with Jim just in terms of thinking more about shadows and the way that the colors interact with the light. So, for example, if you look on under her hat, she's got these yellow kind of strips coming up. So it'd be nice if they had like a darker, like the sides of them were a bit darker, and that kind of thing. And you've definitely got precision to pick out all those things. But just yeah, have a think about even go outside on a real sunny day and look really closely at some objects and go like how bright is one side of this compared to the other, and you'll notice like it can be a really extreme contrast when especially we imagine her being in like Mexico where I'd imagine it's very sunny. So yeah, that'd be what I'd recommend, but great work overall.
Yeah, no, I'd say sort of very similar things. I think the two things that sort of stand out to me is that there's a few places where you do again have that sort of overpainting, and like Matt was saying before, that's like where a lot of the time it's easier to just be sloppy and tidy it up afterwards than try and go in and be hyper precise. But particularly on the sort of little yellow and white pattern on the hat, you can see some of the red sort of touching onto these other areas. And that can again that comes down to that sort of painting inside out, paint all the red first, be sloppy, then paint your red and yellow, so your yellow and white over that, just to sort of tidy it up. And the other thing that stands out to me is that you're highlighting sort of everything in a particular thing, all the same. So like the highlights and shadows at the top of the hair are the same as at the bottom. It's all going sort of you're jumping from 4 to 2 sort of thing, where you've not sort of got the whole volume, the whole field, so to speak, sort of highlighted, paying attention to that sort of the top of the hair is going to be brighter than these areas down underneath the snake where you might have some cast shadows or just generally less shadow to pull the focus in. But the actual volumes, individual sort of areas, nicely highlighted. I think your contrast could be a little bit sort of stronger, as has already been mentioned. But no, it's a really nice piece, and I really like sort of something with so much sort of going on and so much color. It's quite tight and sort of controlled, and it's quite balanced. And it's a really nice little scheme there. And really nicely sort of painted for sort of I think you said it was second bust. Yeah, so really, really nice for that, and for a year of painting. that's really nice, and you should be really happy with that, and keep pushing. um, so moving up to Mandy Rosman, sorry, and this very scantily clad man here. So just asking about struggling with skin tone, and sort of putting it aside and coming back to it, which is something that I'm fully in favour of. If something's getting to you and you're not quite getting it, put it aside. Come back to it later. There's nothing worse than painting with a grudge. So putting something aside, doing something else, or maybe not painting anything else, but just spending time away from the painting table can really sort of unlock things. I think people underestimate the power of not doing something for a bit to make you suddenly come back and understand it. Um, I think in general, I think the skin tone isn't actually isn't bad at all. I think it's a really nice. You've got nice colors there. The palette works really well, and I think the way you've picked out the volumes, um, for the most part, works really well. I think that your contrast could be more sort of precisely used. So it's similar to what I've said a few times to a few different sort of submissions this month of bringing in that sort of idea of it's not just individual muscle volumes, it's one entire volume. So the face is going to be brighter than the shoulders, and upper chest is going to be brighter than his sort of stomach, is going to be brighter than his legs. So everywhere on here has sort of the same level of shadow and the same level of highlight. Um, so it's partly that's a case of the top of your body is going to get more light than the bottom. It's also part of an artistic sort of interpretation thing of trying to bring focus in, because let's be real, compared to the sun, the size of our body isn't that much, but you do get that effect, and I think that's what to me really sort of makes this not quite skin tone not quite as much as I think you want it to be. The colors are great. The way you've taken the volumes, we're not having that sort of islanding. We're sort of the highlights are going up to the top, but you can just push that a little bit more and really accentuate those shapes and volumes. Um, Outside of that, about sort of the expression on the face, I think that comes across really well. I think that you've got sort of angry very well. I mean, to an extent, that's going to be part of the sculpt, but also you can change things with the paint, and a sculpt can be great, and you can not do it justice, or a sculpt can be not as good, and you can really improve it. But I think you've really hit that sort of the way you've got the deep shadows, really sort of accentuates that furrowed brow and makes it you really get that sort of expression, that anger through, which is nice. And sort of, I think a small detail on that really helps sell it is having the eyes, your sort of the iris and the pupil sort of anchored to the bottom of the eye. So it's got that sort of looking down, which is really nice. I think the weakest part for me is probably the metallics. Just there's not. I think you can go for a bit more contrast in there. You've got this really, really bright sort of brassy gold. So I don't want to kill that. I think that works really well. I don't think you want to hold that down too much by mixing in other colors. I think the best way to shade this would be with glazing sort of non-metallic paints over it, so you get that dulling only in the shadows, and you keep that really, really bright, vibrant color in the top. So it's and again that just comes down to sort of playing with the volumes a little bit. But no, I think overall it's a really nice piece. Anything else from you, Jim?
Yeah, I thought the skin was definitely going the right direction. Some really nice tones in there. Could just use some more life in it. So some more bright reds in the cheeks. We say it a lot. Ears, nose, fingers, joints, stuff like that. But yeah, on the whole, I think the highlighting of it's actually pretty good, and I like the tones. You could maybe deepen some of the shadows, as Alex said. But on the whole, I think the skin's looking pretty damn good. You could probably push the texture on the leather a little bit further. As we said before, leather tends to sell a bit better painting wise if it's a bit more distressed. So just like hashing up the edges, putting a few very, very sharp thin lines, just scratches across it. Stipple, don't edge highlight it like metallics, like stipple it on or like cross hatch it towards the edge. Same with this leather across his chest. And then Just some matting down was the only other thing that I had. Some of the leather, you're getting some light reflections in the shadows in the photo, which is this is a shot that shows it best. Yeah, so just matting down the leather as well would really help once you finished. But yeah, I like where it's going, man. It's a cool piece. You put a lot of work into it. I like the glow that you've got coming out of this swordy thing as well. How you've sort of integrated that with the lightning bolt that's in his hand. That's really cool. Very, very nice. So yeah, and then you were saying about the base as well. So the base, I thought was I don't dig cotton wool personally. I just don't think it sells. It looks like cotton wool stuck on your base. So I get that you're trying to make him look like he's up in the clouds. But for me, if I guess if you are going to use it, you've got to fluff it up a little bit more, or just kind of make it a little bit more wispy. Whereas this is like quite densely like curled together, so it doesn't look like anything other than the cotton wool, I'm afraid, buddy. But the rock's looking pretty good. Some nice variation of tones in there and stuff. Just be careful when you're using cork, and you need to bust up the edges a little bit more than this, because you can see that that's a slab of cork, and there as well. So a good way of doing that is to bust it up so it kind of loses the rectangular shape of it. But then if you've got some of the like citadel textures, or just like some putty and some sand or something, just go over the edges where you've got these flat cracks. Just fill them in with something. It doesn't matter what it is, and then prime the whole thing. But yeah, it's a little obvious that it's cork. But yeah, color wise, painting wise, I think it's actually really good. Maybe a tuft or two, maybe. But yeah, just it's the classic problem with working with cork and cotton wool as well. But yeah, on the whole, good stuff, Mandy. Matt, over to you.
Yeah, like people said, I think the skin tone is very nice. Like it's very kind of warm, and also the hair looks nice and soft and everything. And you could just have a little bit more color variety in there to add some depth and realism. On the metals, I think you're going the right way. The way you've placed your highlights seem a little bit random. So just think about the direction of the lighting more, because like you can see in some parts, like you've got light brass and then dark and then light again, but there's no necessarily like kind of rhyme or reason to it. Um, and a tuft, Jim just made me think of it. A tuft might be kind of cool because that'd give us a sense of scale. Like, is he a giant or is he a man? Yeah, because he's on top of a mountain. Like, is he meant to be like 60 feet tall? We can't tell because he's a little figure.
Good point.
And I probably would have just with the lightning bolts. Oh, there's no way you can't paint lightning. Like that's pretty much it. Sorry. So the only way you could do it is have him like be at night, and that's like the light source and everything. That's a completely different piece. So if you don't want to do it, you could just cut it off and then maybe get a spear, something for someone else, or even leave him like that, like he's shaking angrily. But yeah, I don't think like I mean, arguably lightning would just be white. So that's probably about the best way you could do it. If you don't want to get into all sorts of OSL nonsense. Uh, we do lightning also. We like to add a lot of blue to it often. That's often more kind of stylistic in that it's the blue of the sky, whereas the lightning itself is actually, white because it's light. But yeah, no, it's a great looking piece, and definitely going in the right direction for a lot of things. So keep it up. I'll move on up then to Christian Savarda. Painting a couple of years. Most recent model, it's that lady in that mono wheel thing. Yawa. Really cool looking piece. I really immediately was struck by the color palette. It's very original. I kind of felt it's got a definite style to it. I like how it's got tons and tons of different colors, but none of them go the whole way up to like full saturation, and it gives it this kind of like comic booky, cartoony kind of feel to it, and it's very kind of like light and airy. Whereas this piece, I've seen different versions of it, and the main way people would do it is really cyberpunk, like super high contrast, lots of OSL, that kind of thing. And it was cool seeing this the way it looks. It reminds me of some of those Love, Death and Robots shorts have that very kind of pastel-y art style to it. So great work on that. Her hair, I really like that kind of ice cream tone to it. But there's bits of it that are very dark, which I'm not sure if they're meant to be shadow or she's meant to have black streaks in her hair. And they're always at the bottom, which makes me kind of think it's shadow, but that's like far too dark a shadow for in her hair, because I mean it's going to be like it's a shadow falling on light colored hair, so it wouldn't go to such a dark black, I'd imagine. And if you're trying to do it as black streaks, I'd probably put a couple of them on top just to make that a little bit more clear to the eye. Um, the volumetric lighting, it's good in a lot of places, but her left leg doesn't really have any kind of volumetric shadow that I expect on it. I mean, it's a stylistic thing that you don't have like really high contrast between lights and shadows. But like if you look at her knee, the like green fabric there that has really bright kind of yellow on the top and it goes to very dark, and then you look at her leg right beside it, doesn't happen. And then her face, her cheek has a bit of a shadow cast on it, but her leg doesn't cast a shadow on itself. So I think the flatness of the skin tone works fine because she's like a synthetic human kind of thing. So you can totally get away with, oh, there's no blood vessels or skin under the skin. It's like, it is painted, it's artificial. But I think you could definitely just add a bit of shadow in under the leg and then maybe under the arm as well. And then where you have the white painting on the machine where it actually says Yawa, that's just a little bit monochrome for me, and the blue and white striping is a little slightly untidy. I don't know if it's intentional or not. I think maybe having a bit of weather, like where like a couple of bits of the paint have flaked off there, would just make it a little bit more interesting because it's just a very flat white. And a lot of other places, like on the non-metallics and the every other surface on it has a quite interesting texture or feel to it, and that's just kind of stands out as being very plain. I think the eyes work really well. We were talking last week about, you can do interesting interpretations on eyes, and she's got this like blue kind of the wider eyes blue, and then it goes to black, and then blue, and then black again, and it looks good, and sells the whole artificial human kind of thing. And I love that popping green that you have on her like leg warmers, where it's like going all the way up to yellow, and it really works with the kind of summery kind of feel of the piece. Like, that's what I got from it. You guys have anything you want to add on there?
I gotta call out the texturing on the jacket and the boots. Oh, looks super, and also the tire. I don't know if that's sculpted or whether you did that. Either way, the tire looks pretty damn realistic. So well done with that. And the other thing I like about it, there's definitely your work, is this red interference color. So we talked earlier in the video about interference colors on black, and I think you did a great job of making that more interesting, because that could have been super boring just having this black rim around here, but the way that you've incorporated this red in here is stellar, man. So really good job with that. I love the way you've brushed the metals, and you've just got this huge palette of color, and it's very nicely balanced. And I love what you did with her. Like the skin tones are great. I agree with Matt about the shadow, and I'd also maybe suggest like very broad, soft highlights to it. Just one or two, just to punch the contrast and give it a little bit of volumetrics on top of using the shadows. But yeah, I really love this piece, man. I think you did a great job on this. I think it's a massive success. So well done, Christian. Looks great. Alex?
Yeah. I sort of again, I it's been said both by both of you, but I really like the skin tone. I really like the colors. So the color of that slightly pinkier tone works really well with sort of. I think in general, I think that works well with Neko Galaxy sculpts. I think their house style really suits these slightly more cartoony, slightly more sort of artistic interpretations of them. I think it's really nice. Um, and I really like sort of yeah, again, sort of that not overly contrasted look works really well. I think, as has been said, it doesn't quite work everywhere. Where Matt pointed out the sort of the thigh to the fabric on her knee, it does come across a little bit confusing in terms of how the light's working there. But I think the way to get away with that is um, we've mentioned before about you don't need everywhere to be super highly contrasted. If you have the overall contrast sort of quite strong, so the face everywhere might only be one, two, three maybe levels of highlights. But then if you have the face be very bright and then the chest be a little bit less bright, the same level of contrast but a little bit less bright, the legs a little bit less bright than that, and sort of almost that vignette of highlight can really sort of help to snap the focus in. Because at the moment, to me, the focus is on the face, but mostly because of how bright the hair is with that sort of white and pink. Sort of the brightness of the eyes. It's still a little bit marked. You settle there, but it's not an easy settle. Sort of the eye still jumps around the piece a bit because everything's got these quite bright colors and everything's more or less the same in terms of contrast. And then the other thing that sort of stood out to me because you asked about sort of the what stands out as the biggest area for improvement. To me, your non-metallics are nice. I think they can have a bit more contrast to make them really sell as metallic, but I really like the texturing. But what stands out to me with them is your light direction feels a little bit confused with them. So there's a few of the cylinders where you've got the highlight sort of on the front, as if the light's coming from sort of towards her face. Then you've got down by sort of the bottom by her boot, that little flat brushed little circle there. You've got it highlighted as if the light's coming from the direction of her face relative to that. And then there's a few other places where, like her face, you've got that nice shadow on her cheek that says that the highlight's coming from top camera left. So just a little bit more consideration of the direction of your light would just sort of snap the whole piece into just that little bit more focus. But overall, I think the painting is really, really nice. I mean, everything sells in metallic, and if I wasn't wanting to be nitpicky, I'd say your non-metallics are great. But that's what I would focus on for the next piece as sort of my main sort of thought on this is just that light direction. But overall, I think it's really, really nice. It's something you should be really happy with.
Cool. Then finishing up with yours, Alex. So, did you want to kind of just talk about it a little bit and?
No, I'm happy to jump straight into anything you want to say, so I don't ramble too much about my own piece.
All right. So the other piece, that's the old dude, isn't it? The Radagast or whoever it is. Is that what you're working on? Like the old wizard.
Cormac.
Yeah, the Cormac one. Cormac. That's what I'm working on.
Oh, right, okay. So nothing in particular focusing wise. So just wanted to play around with ideas for a more story-driven piece with heavy atmosphere, which hopefully comes across. And I think atmosphere does come across quite nicely on this. It is a very deliberate lighting setting that you've shown him from like 10 o'clock, which is picked out really nicely, like on the face. And you were saying a minute ago about having, the highest highlights reserved for the face, and then further down the body it's a little bit less intense, and then down on the hands and like the lower arm and the bits of the teddy. Still picked out really nicely, but I like how you've got that spectrum of intensity. So yeah, that is selling as a really, really poignant light coming through. I love how you've done the hair as well, picking out those sheens across the volumes. Underneath the cowl as well. I did think this little bit coming out over the coming out of her sort of tunic thing maybe could punch that just a little bit, because it's on the same level as the other hair on the other side, which is highlighted brighter. So that did stand out a little bit. I thought the texturing was ace, especially in the little teddy. Very, very subtle, but definitely there. So really nice work on that. And beautiful work on the eyes as well. Big dolly eyes. Really sets that alien kind of setting, lizard-like, cylindrical irises, yellow, and picking the glints up from correct direction that light's coming from. So yeah, that's all. The front's looking really, really awesome, man. For the lighting on the back, I don't know if it's my brightness on my screen, but it's like very, 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 very soft glow from the back. So that was deliberate.
Kind of like I wanted it to be soft, but I also think it's to an extent. No, it's easy to say it's a photo thing, but it genuinely looks a lot brighter in the hand. My mini photography is really not great. Sort of still working with a phone camera, and it's I think it's my struggle is I like to paint with a lot of contrast of saturation.
Mm-hmm.
So the skin tone and the glow very, very saturated. The teddy and the sort of clothes very desaturated. So trying to capture that, I really struggle with that. But it was to an extent meant to be that little bit softer.
Yeah. So I think like the directionality of it and where you've placed things is good. I can't tell what anything's supposed to be made out of. So like that canteen that's hanging off her back, I kind of looked at that and thought, well, that would be metal, wouldn't it? So I'd expected that to be a bit brighter than like the bag and like her flesh and stuff. That was one minor thing. But then the only other thing really was I thought that maybe the shadows could be deepened a little bit where the blue light meets the red light, the occlusion shadow. It's tricky because of the shape of like the folds that are on her cowl. But I did just think that there could have been like broader shadows behind where those folds are. The blue side was better, where the light coming down and like on the bag and stuff, and how you've like limited the texture to only the lit parts. That was really really cool use of stippling there. I just thought the bag maybe could have had something else going on with it, like the straps being a different color, just to break it up a little bit. It's just like this big area, and I think maybe it's a little bit sheeny as well, so it's kind of hard to tell what's highlighted and what's kind of sheen. But yeah, what you did with the cowl, just taking a little bit further on the bag, like in the same way, I thought that would have been really really nice. But I think you captured the lighting setting pretty perfectly. So even like Teddy's eyes got like a little beady eye in there. I picked that out. That was really really nicely done. So yeah, really really great work, man. I really like it, Matt.
Yeah, I wrote like a written down post
Yeah.
replying it, so hopefully you read that. But if you didn't, I'm not going to recap it. Yeah, I really like the lighting scheme coming from camera left and reading across. I heard that helps if you're an English speaker because we just naturally read from that direction. I don't know who said that. But yeah, no, it's really effective. And what really, like, one of my favorite little touches is that you have a cast shadow in her eye. Like, if you look, like, the white of her eye is darker nearest her nose on that side. Um, whereas it'd be easy to kind of leave that off, but it's a great little detail and it ups the contrast of the piece and it also adds a lot of atmosphere having the kind of shadow in there. Um, then yeah, and the skin, the way it's got that kind of glossiness to it, and it's gone from the purple up to the white, like that's a reflected light. That looks super good. And then on the lights, I know you were saying you were struggling with getting moonlight in. I think if you look at one of the views where it's mostly from like her rear right, like behind her right shoulder, like if you just dial that down a little bit, that would look quite like moonlight to my eyes. But the red light, I'm not 100% sure. What, to your mind, what is creating that red light?
Generic sci-fi red light.
Fire.
So you don't know.
And a campfire.
Well,
Yeah,
that,
well, I was sort of in my head. I pictured this sort of almost like in the like a hangar for like ships and things, or out, or more outside in the outside at night, but
Yeah.
in a like bison like spaceships or whatever.
Yeah.
Or like so like you know like sort of almost like a tail light on a car, but
like a neon kind of light.
yeah.
I had Burning Barrel. Like she's a refugee
Yeah.
escaping things.
That's the thing, because for
Yeah.
me, it flip-flop between those two. Because one of the things is the way you've also like the way you have it like lit, like her hip is really strongly lit, so it's kind of telling us that it's really close to her because we can see the light fall off, which again has that, oh, she's standing beside a campfire, and the whole atmosphere of the piece makes it seem like she's like a refugee or something as well.
Yeah.
So I think one of the tricks you can do, and it's like a purely artistic thing, I don't know if I said this in the post, is to try and like represent the light source in the cast light, which is not something that really happens in real life. But like if it was a campfire, you could have like little tiny dabs of like orange and stuff, like embers floating up that are just subtly there to trigger us out. And with the neon, like neon tends to be like really, really, really saturated, or that's how we perceive it. And even then having it go up to white in a couple of places, even though the light from a neon sign doesn't cast any white light, but in our minds we always think of looking at a neon sign, it's always white in the center where you have the like electrode-y things in there. So if you had like a little scratchy, like buzzy looking kind of white, and you could even glaze over it again, so it's near white in that red, that would give us more the idea of it being a neon thing, as opposed to being like a campfire or generic whatever.
Yeah, and as I say, I think there is an element of sort of the photography there. Because actually, the very very brightest parts there have actually got some like a fluorescent. I think it's Vallejo fluorescent red.
Okay, yeah.
You can't see that on the photo,
Yeah.
I just need to get a
super
better camera.
annoying. especially with bust, because like even
yeah.
like with mine, there's stuff I painted on that I was like, you can't see it, and then I
see it.
exaggerated it for the photos, and then it looked weird in real life, and I ended up repainting it. And just on one last thing is, you know, obviously with this kind of thing, you've got obviously two very contrasting light sources, um, and if you can at all, just try and make it so that you have a bit of each in every view you've got of it, wherever possible. So, like, if you look at her, like the main view where it's mainly from the red side, like I can imagine the top of her rucksack would probably still actually have some of the main light source on it, or you could just work it in there on like some of the folds where it's facing upwards, and like just to have it for like for the sake of the piece that in every view you look at it, you kind of have a little bit of
A bit
the
of both,
whole
yeah.
piece as well. But it's tricky because you end up, you know, faking geometry and stuff to make the lights work out that way. But great work overall.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to hear, you know, dedicated feedback in that way. I don't get that too often, so it's always nice.
That's what we're here for, man.
You're more than welcome.
All right, we finish up. That was our last entry for the month. So thanks a million, everyone, for sticking around to the end of the video. It's been a pleasure, as always, to review all these great artworks. And just before we go, I'd like to remind you that Painters Motivating Painters is a Facebook group. It's free to join, and it's open to painters of all abilities. So if you want to see your model reviewed in a future video, head on over there, and we'll be happy to have you. All the best, and happy painting.